Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for waiting. We now like to begin the Japan OECD High-Level Policy Seminar, Zero Carbon Buildings, Global Trends on Life Cycle CO2 Reduction. I'll be serving as the MC. I am Nakaya Akiko. I seek for your cooperation. Thank you. To begin, on behalf of the organizers, we will have greetings from the Ministry of Land, Transport, Infrastructure, and Tourism, and also the Building Center of Japan. First, Minister of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism of Japan, Nakano Hiromasa, please.
すいません。OECD とのセミナーということ。
This is the OECD seminar, so I'd like to deliver my greetings in English.
And a warm welcome to the seminar. It is a great honor for me to address you. I'm Nakano, Minister of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism. I would like to thank the panelists, Director Lamia, and all the members of the OECD for your great cooperation in organizing the seminar out of your busy schedule. And thank you to the audience for your interest in this theme and your participation. I heard that the seminar was quickly oversubscribed, and I am pleased that so many people have shown so much interest. I am very honored to co-host this policy seminar with the OECD. And we have invited Director Lamia to discuss the latest global trends related to housing, buildings, and the future of decarbonization. This seminar program is one of the key outcomes of the OECD's program on decarbonizing buildings in cities and regions launched in 2021 with the support of MLIT. I would like to commend Director Lamia and the CFE Bureau for leading the international discussion that the project has expanded considerably by mobilizing European countries. In recent years, global challenges such as the need to create a decarbonized society in response to climate change and adapt to the rapid development of digital technologies have become increasingly critical across all professional fields. The same applies to the fields of housing, buildings, and urban planning, where high-level international discussions on sustainable cities have been actively taking place, including at the G7 Sustainable Urban Development Ministers meeting. Japan possesses some of the world's most advanced technologies in these areas, and we are committed to working with other countries and the OECD. Japan is particularly vulnerable to typhoons, torrential rains, and other weather-related disasters due to its geographical and natural conditions. It is very important to address climate change, particularly the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. In Japan, weather disasters have become more severe and frequent in recent years because of climate change. Japan has set a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, and in order to achieve this goal, it is pivotal to make efforts in the housing and building sectors, which account for 40% of global energy-derived greenhouse gas emissions and about 30% of Japan's energy consumption. We have been progressively strengthening its efforts to improve the energy consumption performance of buildings. So, Japan enacted the Building Energy Efficiency Act in 2015. Starting in April 2025, all new buildings, including residences, will be required to meet the energy conservation standards. The reduction of whole life carbon, WLC, in buildings, which is the focus of today's discussion, is the next step in our efforts. WLC requires efforts throughout the entire building life cycle, from construction to demolition. For this reason, I hope that the discussions among stakeholders from industry, government, and academia gathered here today will further accelerate our efforts. In closing, I hope that today's seminar will be meaningful for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Nakano. Minister Nakano will have to leave us now due to some urgent government matters. Thank you very much for joining us despite your very busy schedules today. Please do send him off with hearty applause. Next, we would like to call upon the Project Professor of University of Tokyo, former Special Advisor to the Prime Minister and Advisor to the BCJ, the Building Center of Japan, Mr. Hiroto Izumi, to address us. Thank you. Because this was an OECD meeting and the Minister spoke in English, I'll speak in English.
Esteemed colleagues, it is a great privilege to address such an esteemed gathering today. Today, we are honored to welcome Director Lamia of the OECD and delighted to co-host Japan OECD High-Level Policy Seminar in collaboration with the OECD, the Ministry of Land Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, from now on, MLIT, IBEX, and the Building Center of Japan. As one of the organizers, I would like to extend my greetings at the beginning of this seminar. In April last year, I had the opportunity to meet with the Deputy Secretary General Takeuchi and Director Lamia at the OECD headquarters in Paris to discuss two key aspects of Japan-OECD collaboration. The first was our joint effort toward realizing sustainable cities in Southeast Asia. Last month in Indonesia, we hosted the Sustainable Housing Building and Urban Seminar with the OECD, BCJ, JUBH, and area, and the Indonesian Ministry of Housing and Settlement Areas. The newly established Prabowo administration in Indonesia, which took office in October last year, has set an ambitious goal of supplying 3 million housing units annually across urban and rural areas. However, achieving this while balancing economic growth and climate change countermeasures remains a significant challenge. We have confirmed that the OECD's new Sustainable Housing and Urban Project for Indonesia, set to launch this spring, will be carried out in collaboration with the OECD, Indonesia Ministry of Housing and Settlement Areas, MLIT, and Japan and the OECD. Japan has extensive experience in large-scale housing supply and rapid urbanization post-World War II. By leveraging this knowledge, we hope to work closely with Director Lamia to contribute to housing urban policy development in Southeast Asia. The second key point we discussed in Paris last year was the decarbonization of buildings. The relationship between the OECD and MLIT Housing Bureau has a long history. Since 1998, Japan has dispatched 9 officials to the OECD over the past 27 years. In 2021, with MLIT support, the OECD launched a new program, Decarbonization Building in Cities and Regions. Since 2023, BCJ has also been actively supporting this initiative. We also welcome the establishment of the OECD's new Sustainable Building Unit in July last year. In May last year, I requested that Director Lamia launch a report in Tokyo on whole life carbon policies, which Japan has been supporting. I am pleased that this has now materialized today. Now, I would like to briefly touch on building decarbonization policy. Decarbonization building is a global challenge, and the governments play a critical role by employing a variety of policy tools, including regulatory measures such as mandatory energy efficiency standards, economic incentive like subsidies and tax benefit, information tools such as labeling system, capacity building effort for training. However, several key challenges remain. First, how to balance net zero target with housing affordability. Second, how to redirect real estate investment towards sustainable practices. Third, how to leverage digital technology such as BIM for building decarbonization. Environment policies are evolving rapidly, particularly in the EU. Today, we are joined by Ms. Here from Denmark and Mr. Roger from Sweden. Both countries have introduced embodied carbon regulation for construction. Sweden in 2022 and Denmark in 2023, well ahead of the EU's upcoming 2028 regulations. There is much for Japan to learn from global environmental policies. Against the backdrop of these international trends, Japan is also experiencing unique development. Japan's academic sector has played a pioneering role in building life cycle assessment guidelines. Notably, Professor Murakami and Professor Ikaga led the publication of Building Life Cycle Assessment Guideline by the Architecture Institute of Japan in 1999. Since 2018, EMRIT has introduced a subsidy program for life cycle carbon minus housing under the guidance of Professor Seike. However, until recently, national initiatives remained limited. In recent years, the real estate sector has taken the lead in addressing embodied carbon. Today, we are honored to have Chairman Komoda of Mitsui Fudosan, who will speak about the company's initiatives. In March 2022, Mitsui Fudosan published Greenhouse Gas Emission Calculation Manual for Construction, followed by a similar manual from the Real Estate Association in June 2023. Additionally, President Mitsuyoshi of Sumitomo Forestry is with us today, as eco-friendly high-rise wooden buildings are gaining traction both in Japan and globally. In December 2022, under the leadership of Professor Murakami and Ikaga, the Zero Carbon Building Promotion Conference was established through public-private academic partnership. Furthermore, in October 2024, Japan released JCAT, Japan Carbon Assessment Tool for Building Life Cycle, and assessment tool tailored to the country's building sector. EMRIT has also allocated the budget in next year's proposal to support the integration of BIM with life cycle carbon assessment. Today, we welcome Deputy Director General Miyazawa from Tokyo Metropolitan Government. Starting in April this year, Tokyo will introduce a new evaluation criterion in its building environmental plan for structure over 2,000 square meters, requiring building owners to measure and reduce carbon dioxide emission during construction. Moreover, in November last year, the Cabinet Office launched a cross-ministerial collaboration initiative to enhance coordination across the construction, materials, environmental, and finance sectors. The Cabinet Office and EMRIT serve as a secretariat, working closely with Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI, Ministry of Environment, the Forestry Agency, and the Financial Service Agency. Having served as a special advisor to the Prime Minister for 9 years and previously working on housing, building, urban policy at EMRIT, I understand the complexities of interministerial coordination. However, this establishment of this framework represents a significant step forward. Reducing whole life carbon emission requires collaboration across the entire construction value chain. Moving forward, I hope relevant ministries and industry players will work together to accelerate the effort. In panel session 2, we have gathered top leaders from industry, academia, and government who have played pivotal roles in these initiatives. I look forward to fruitful discussion on how Japan can take concrete action and communicate its effort globally. Finally, I hope that today's seminar will contribute to the realization of sustainable cities in Japan and globally, and serve a catalyst for new initiatives among all participants. Thank you for your attention. ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Dr. Izumi. Next, we're going to have the launch of the OECD report. The report is titled Zero Carbon Buildings in Cities, a Whole Life Cycle Approach. We have the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, CFE, of the OECD, Ms. Lamia Kamal Shawi. Please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Izumi, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, Minister Nakano, who just left. I want to take the opportunity to provide our great appreciation for the support, the constant support of MLIT to OECD work on regional development, but also in particular for this very, very important project for which Japan has shown great global leadership. So I'm really delighted to welcome you to this OECD Japan high-level policy seminar on zero carbon buildings. A special thanks to our co-host, of course, MLIT, BCG, but also IBEX, Institute for Built Environment and Carbon Neutral, for their leadership on this very important issue. And I just mentioned that it's not just in Japan, it's globally. Building decarbonization is an issue we cannot afford to ignore. And as Minister just mentioned, buildings account for 40% of energy-related global greenhouse gas emissions. In major cities like London, Paris, New York, and here in Tokyo, that number can reach up to 70%. So it's enormous. So we want to fix the problem. We have to go and work with large and small cities as well. Our net zero ambitions will greatly depend on that. And it is for that reason that 4 years ago, the OECD launched a program on decarbonizing buildings in cities and regions. The idea was to bring together national and local government, together with other stakeholders, private sector representative. Of course, it was essential to address this critical issue. Japan have strongly supported that work. Together with France, have co-hosted the OECD Sustainable Buildings Roundtable that we held annually since 2022. And we know that Japan has also championed this subject, not just in the OECD, but also trying in the G20 and G7, and more recently in the G7 under the Italian presidency. So last year, thanks to this great work, great support, we were able to conduct the first ever global survey covering 28 countries across different continents, Africa, America, Asia, and Europe, including Latin America. So it was really global. And this report showed that most countries are taking steps to improve the energy efficiency of buildings by establishing mandatory energy efficiency codes and financial incentives such as subsidies and low-interest loans. That's the great news. However, the bad news is that this report also showed that this is not going to be enough. 25% of the emissions a building generates during its life are locked in during the construction phase before anyone even steps foot in them. From producing materials like concrete and steel to transporting and assembling them on site, every step in the construction process releases carbon. And over the last 5 years, it has been estimated that global construction activity consumed an area the size of the country of Switzerland. This is huge. This is not a minor issue. This is huge. And I can tell you that before we engage into that work, very few people were aware about this fact. So that really came at the right moment. By 2050, construction-related emissions will account for nearly half of all buildings emissions, and likely more in Asia and Africa, where the building stock is expected to double over that time frame. Therefore, we need urgently countries and cities to come together to tackle carbon emissions across the whole life cycle of buildings. And yet, in our work, we found that only 6 out of the 28 countries surveyed in the first global monitoring report actually have a policy for whole life carbon. This is really too little. So we are pleased today to launch with Japan this new report, Zero Carbon Buildings in Cities, a whole life cycle approach. And I'm going to show you the short summary in English and in Japanese, but the book is super fat. So I invite you to have a look. It's going to be posted on the WhatsApp. The report is based on a survey of 11 leading countries and 7 cities, and it highlights how they are addressing this issue, what challenges they face, and how to follow their paths. And allow me to acknowledge the presence of the lead author of this work, Takeshi Miyamori, who is from MLIT, working in my directorate in Paris. And unfortunately, he's going to be back. So you're going to be happy, but I'm going to be sad. So thank you very much, Mr. Miyamori. So what are the key messages of this report? First, investing in the right data is essential. The #1 barrier cited by countries and cities is the lack of data on the carbon content of construction materials. Without accurate, transparent data, emissions are really difficult to track and control. France, my own country, has been a pioneer in tackling this issue, introducing a state-funded certification scheme and new industry standards, resulting in a comprehensive database of over 5,000 environmental product declaration, or EPDs. These provide construction firms with reference values to assess the carbon content of key materials. So important data is really essential. Second message of this report, policymakers must tailor the approach to local needs and adopt a step-by-step approach to adopting new regulation. Construction practices, obviously, they differ across cities depending on local resources, architecture, and environmental conditions. And there, policy makers must work closely with industry to set realistic, enforceable carbon limits. Policymakers must also give businesses, especially, and I insist here, small businesses, time to adapt to new regulations, to source new materials, and train new workers in sustainable construction methods. Sweden's approach is a good example in this respect. Sweden engaged extensively with the construction sector before establishing a pathway to limit the carbon content of buildings by 2027, and progressively have been able to reduce limits thereafter. Third, cities must be empowered to take a leading role in the shift to a whole life carbon approach, and this is a very important message of this report. Generally, local governments across the world, they have powers over planning, permitting, and infrastructure. They also have access to local knowledge and partnership, which actually they are using to lead the way. We have seen some cities like Greater London in the UK or Vancouver in Canada moving ahead of their national government to introduce mandatory limits on whole life carbon. They go beyond national targets. However, our report showed that only 4 out of the 11 national governments that we survey currently have mechanisms to align national and local whole life carbon policies. It also shows that only 2 out of the 7 cities receive support from national government to develop tools and capacity. And here, I'm talking only about the front runners. What about the rest? There are also good examples of cities that are inspiring other cities, such as here in Tokyo, where the Tokyo Metropolitan Government is set to launch its own initiative on sustainable construction this April, utilizing JCAT, a national whole life carbon assessment tool that was developed by the Zero Carbon Building Promotion committee in partnership with local and national government, university, and industry. So ladies and gentlemen, Japan's leadership in this agenda is really delivering results, not just domestically here in Japan, but on a global scale at the OECD, at the G7, at the G20. In March last year, the Global Forum on Buildings and Climate in Paris was held, and we had ministers responsible for construction and climate, which for the first time met together. They were meeting separately. They commit to more sustainable building practices through what we call the Chaillot Declaration. And this Chaillot Declaration was endorsed by 70 countries from around the world, including Japan. This was huge, and Japan was with France behind this big initiative. So we hope that today's report would provide the inspiration policymakers really need to turn those commitments into action. I want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Izumi. He's also making things happen. And he mentioned in his introduction that we're going to work together in Indonesia. So that's already, first step to go outside Japan. And we plan to bring this new framework, this new data to many more countries. So thank you very much for your leadership, Dr. Izumi. So now is the time for government, for cities, for industries to come together to drive the shift to zero carbon building. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for waiting. We'd now like to begin panel discussion 1, the world's leading edge in WLC policies. Allow me to introduce the panelists. We'd like them to come up on stage. We have the head of Secretariat for Nordic Sustainable Construction within the Danish Authority of Social Services and Housing, Ms. Helle Reda Mosen. Next is Deputy Director, Division for Housing and Building, Ministry of Rural Affairs and Infrastructure of Sweden, Mr. Roger Eriksson. And next from Japan, a Deputy Director General Cabinet Secretariat, Prime Minister's Office, Mr. Takashi Imamura. And from here now, after, the moderator will be moderating. The moderator is a Senior Manager, Sustainable Building Unit, CFE, OECD, Mr. Takeshi Miyamori. Mr. Miyamori, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'm delighted to moderate this first panel session. So my name is Takeshi Miyamori, and I'm leading a program called Decarbonizing Buildings in Cities and Regions at the OECD. So I would like to express my gratitude to the Housing Bureau of EMLIT and also the BCJ. So with their support, we could, conduct an interview with European countries, including Sweden and Denmark. At the third OECD Sustainable Buildings Roundtable, co-hosted by EMLIT and BCJ and Japan, France, OECD, we had nearly 6 hours of in-depth discussion on whole life carbon policies. We had valuable insights from the European Commission, France, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Tokyo, Greater London, Helsinki, and Malmö from Sweden. So among these discussions, there were several speakers who left a deep impression on me, and I wanted to hear more about the story. So today, those very individuals, Ms. Helle Reda Mosen, Mr. Roger Eriksson, and Mr. Takashi Imamura are here with us. So Helle leads the whole life carbon policies at the Nordic Sustainable Construction. and also works for the Danish government. Denmark has already implemented whole life carbon limit values in 2023, and now advancing their expansions. Roger from Sweden, he leads a whole life carbon policies, and Swedish government have already introduced a mandatory reporting for the upfront carbon. And Swedish government has a step-by-step approach, which is quite unique within European countries. Takashi previously led the building code in EMLIT, and now he's working at the Cabinet Secretariat in Japan. Last year, his team established a whole of government approach, whole of government framework involving multiple ministries to tackle whole life carbon policies. Japan is a process of introducing a new policies and is facing various challenges. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to moderate with the distinguished panelists today. And also, if time allows, I would like to take some questions from the floor after their presentation. So let us begin with a presentation from Takashi. The Takashi, floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Takeshi. And good afternoon, everyone. And it's nice to see you again, Hele and Roger, because we have already met in Paris last year, as Miyamori-san, Takeshi has mentioned, at the third round of round table in Paris. So today, I'm very happy to talk about Japan's efforts for the decarbonizing building issue, especially about the multi-level, step-by-step WLC approach in Japan. And first of all, I would like to touch on the background information. And this is the communique of the Environmental Minister's communique, which was held in Sapporo 2 years ago. And at that time, regarding the buildings, decarbonizing building and life cycle issue has been included like this. And also, they have recognized the importance of the use of sustainable low carbon materials, including wood, and also the whole life cycle building approach in design and construction. And this is the classification in the International Society regarding the whole life cycle stages. Many of you might have seen this one before, but I would like to underline that we have been trying to reduce the operational carbon so far, the circle under here, B6, by introducing the energy efficiency standards so far. But the problem still exists for the existing building because normally the building energy codes, energy standards only apply to the new building, not the existing one. So we still have so much efforts to do. But nowadays, as the operational carbon is decreasing because of the strengthening of the energy code, this embodied carbon of the life cycle has been gradually outstanding. And especially, we have to tackle the so-called upfront carbon, which is the green one on the left-hand side, because this is the biggest emission during this cycle. And anyway, today's session is about the whole life carbon, WHC. In this case, we mean both operational carbon and embodied carbons. I will also touch on the operational carbon in order to talk about the step-by-step approach that Japan has taken so far. The challenge to reduce the operational carbon by implementing the mandatory energy efficiency standards is to minimize negative impact on the economy, and at the same time not to cause any confusion, both technically and procedurally. And how do you solve these challenges? I would like to underline the step-by-step approach, as many people are already saying, and also the capacity buildings, among others. And this is shows a step-by-step approach of the energy code in Japan. And as you see, we have introduced the large scale, the mandatory code for the large scale non-residential building first, and then medium size, and finally small non-residential building, and all residential buildings as well, starting from this April, very soon. And as you see on the vertical arrow, we are now, we started with the minimum level standard of the energy efficiency, but we are trying to upgrade or strengthen the level of the standards, and goes toward the net zero level by 2030 at the latest. That's our aim. And this one shows the Japan's major policy regarding the energy. And as I said, capacity buildings is the key, especially for the training for the small and the medium contractors. And of course, all kinds of financial incentives should be provided, as well as certification systems. Finally, I would like to talk about embodied carbon. This is not the Japanese system, because I don't have much to talk about the Japan, because we have just started the discussion. But to share, I just wanted to share this European trend, European approach made by the European Commission regarding the EPBD, which stands for Energy Performance of Building Directive, which was amended last year. And as you see, the life cycle carbon shall be calculated and disclosed of all new buildings larger than 1,000 square meters starting January 2028. And then all new buildings from January 2030. And interestingly, by January 2027, the member states like Denmark or Sweden is also included, member states shall publish a roadmap detailing the introduction of limit value. Very aggressive vision, but starting from 2030. I think this is crazy, but this is what they have already decided. So I think this one, we can also call it a step-by-step approach. And but that European Commission's directive is about the calculation and the disclosure, but not the limited value so far. But as you see, there are some European countries who have already introduced the regulatory system. And Sweden, of course, they have started the mandatory calculation 3 years ago for the upfront carbon, and I think Roger will talk about it later. And Denmark, of course, and you have already set the limit value, and Hele will talk about it after this. And this is the image of the two disassembled building parts for the two-story detached house prepared by Sekisui. And as you see, this only small house consists of some 60,000 building parts with almost 1,000 kinds of products, so many. And if we were to calculate all the building parts, under the evaluation of the whole life carbon, it is so time-consuming. But this is not the exact science, I think, and maybe we're going to have to consider how we may be able to carry out the calculation efficiently. So that's the issue, challenge that we are facing. So anyway, we have already set up the collaboration system. First, Zero Carbon Building Promotion Council on the left-hand side, which consists of academia and industries, as well as local government like Tokyo Metropolitan Government and related ministries. And we have established this one 2 years ago. Yes, and Professor Murakami and Professor Ikaga, who's here, leading, and Professor Seiki as well. And anyway, they have already established, released so-called JCAT that Director Lamia has already, and Dr. Izumi has mentioned, last year, which is really great. And also, as you see on the right-hand side, we have established the interministerial liaison meeting and to coordinate and talk about the legal system to be introduced in the future. I think I would call it a multi-level and a whole of government approach as well. And as you see, decarbonizing efforts must include so many stakeholders, starting with manufacturers and, of course, building owners like real estate developers, and designers like architects and construction contractors, and building users after the completion of buildings, and of course, financial institutions. So we need to collaborate somehow, and in the interministerial meeting, each ministry in charge of those industry have to take care of those industry for the smooth implement of the system, new system. And this is the final slide, I think. This one shows a roadmap or image, just the image of step by step. We are now just discussing among the interministerial meeting. And as you see, we have to think about all kinds of measures in order to promote the WLC evaluation, and also how we may be able to push forward the EPD, so-called EPD, to be obtained by manufacturers. And in the middle, I said we put targets of the legal system. And maybe this is not the final decision, but maybe we start with the larger one, large building, and then a smaller one. And maybe we start with the new building, and then we include the existing buildings. And maybe we start with the upfront carbon, like Sweden, and then NWLC in the future. Well, this is just an image of the step-by-step approach, but in order not to confuse the economy of Japan, maybe this kind of step-by-step approach should be considered carefully. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Takashi. I think you have already touched upon very important aspects, such as public-private partnership, and also like the interministerial cooperation. You said whole of government approach. This is the crucial steps, I think. And also you have already mentioned the step-by-step approach, which Japan will do from now on. So, I mean, Denmark and Sweden has already adopted a step-by-step approach, but the interesting thing is that their approach, their path is a bit different. So now, let's hear from Helle from Denmark. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for being here, listening to us this afternoon. Thank you very much for you here who invited us, and for the really in-depth work you've done. I hope you all see the report. I think it's really good. Well done. So my name is Helle Redder Momsen. I'm from Denmark, and I have two hats today, too. I'm the head of secretary for this Nordic Sustainable Construction that I'll tell you some experiences about. But I also work in the Danish Authority of Social Services and Housing, and therefore I will tell you some of the Danish experience that was requested. So are you ready for a bit more information? So in the Nordic countries, we like to work closely together. We have this vision. The Nordic prime ministers and larger CEOs came together in Iceland in 2019 and made this vision for 2030, where we want to be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. So I think all of you here know how important construction is to actually achieve that vision. And therefore, the Nordic ministers of housing and construction came together and made this declaration. I will not go into depth with it, but in short, it focuses on low carbon principles in construction and circular principles, and want us to motivate that. But to be able to come closer to this declaration and the wishes, we had to work very closely together. And for that, they set aside funds for us to work closely together in the Nordic countries and engaging others as well, with the purpose of really ensuring that we could have a more sustainable region, focusing on sustainable and competitive construction and housing, and minimizing both the environmental and the climate impact from construction. So in this huge program, where all the Nordic countries were very involved and contributed a lot, we had 5 work packages. So there's a lot of information out there, but I have 15 minutes for 2 cases. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what we found out from one of the work packages, and that is the work package you can see on the screen. We started in 2021, actually more or less in December, and then we ended last year. So you're getting all the fruits from our collaboration. I don't remember. No, it's like that. So what I will tell you about today is actually mainly task 1. The data and the BIM for LCA is also super important for the process, but I'll not go into depth for that. So Takashi just mentioned that the European nations are working hard also to implement this regulation, but Sweden were the first to implement that you have to calculate the climate impact of your buildings. Then came Norway in 2022, and Denmark came after in 2023, saying that you have to calculate, but there's also a budget of how much CO2 you can emit. At the moment, that budget in Denmark is targeted buildings larger than 1,000 square meters, but that will change in 2025. And I'll get back to that when I go into the Danish case. So this is a wild slide. I think you can actually read it, but it's like a summary of some of the implementation steps. You also have a version of it in the policy report from OECD. You already mentioned how the life cycle approaches, but that is the picture. It's just the different phases visualized in a different way. And when you make this regulation, it means a lot what you include in your regulation. So we have had different reports and different workshops and different discussions, very close discussions among our Nordic colleagues, also with European colleagues, and now with you. And some of the things that we can see is that it really matters what kind of buildings to include. Is it only the big ones? Which ones of all the buildings? What parts of the building? I really loved your picture or your slide with all the building components. There's a lot, but you also know the price of each of those. So why not know the carbon emission? Which parts do you include? And yeah, how do you report it? So when you're either the municipality or the government, you want to have these data, but it has to be in a format that's doable so it doesn't become economically and time-consuming burden. Our energy mixes are also changing, so it means a lot what scenarios you make for your energy. So all these things we mapped very detailedly in a report, and you can see that in the report on the picture. If you get the slides, I think there's a link to the report, or you can search for the name. So based on all this work, really good researchers and consultants helped us to summarize, and we made these 8 key steps to consider when you implement regulation. So it's up to each country. They know their context best, but these are some of the experiences that we felt were really important. So to build up competences, you have to have some learning resources. In Denmark, we had certification schemes beforehand. There was also a voluntary scheme before, so that helped the industry and academia and everyone supporting this transition to know. So here are some examples from the Nordic countries. All these pictures are different examples. We also, in the program, developed this, we call it skills for reuse. So it's educational material for vocational schools on how to build with reused materials. Secure stakeholder involvement is very important for us in the Nordic countries, so we have had really strong dialogues with the industry. And in the picture on the side of the slide, there are specific examples from all the Nordic countries and regions, if you want inspiration, but I think you already have some good initiatives here in Japan. Then you need access to data, both generic and specific data. And to build up that also takes time and capacity. So you don't want that bottleneck to stop it all. So that's important to build up. Yeah, this is linked to it. So the EPDs, so the environmental product declarations, you need a lot of them to make good calculations. The fifth, create case basics. So if you need to put the limit value at one point, you need to know where to put it to be ambitious or not. You can do that in different ways. You can either calculate directly or you can make more artificial calculations. There are different ways. Here are some of the reports we did in the Nordics. Then determine the initial scope. You talk about a step-by-step approach here and maybe take some modules and then later others. There's different pros and cons of that. But it's important to do it, and it's important to have a long time horizon for how you're going to establish it so that the industry can prepare. At least that was a key message in the Danish industry. Yeah, so establish the long-term plan. And then the last part is that what we are looking into now is that, of course, the existing building mass is super important. And how do we take best care of that? These are some of the considerations that we are now facing. So if you want to know more about this or some of the many other things we have been working on, then we have a knowledge center and you are most welcome. It's open and to be shared. And of course, if you have other good ideas for us, we are very happy to hear them. And yeah, some more information. You can join us on LinkedIn or other things. So that was the Nordic Sustainable Construction hat. Now I jump to the Danish hat. So experiences from Denmark. In Denmark, we have a very ambitious climate goal of being of reducing our climate with 70% by 2030. And to be able to do that, the Prime Minister's asked 14 partnerships to give their input. One of the input was from the construction sector, and one of the key recommendations here was to enforce limit values. So in 2021, we made this national strategy for sustainable construction with 21 initiatives. And one of the most important was really to implement this whole life carbon, both the calculation and the limit value. So one of the things in the strategy said that we have to update the measures every second year. So we did that in 2024. We made a new agreement on how the limit will be in this year by July. And it's really, there was a strong wish politically to tighten it. So we tightened the CO2 limit value. It's very different from each building how much they can reduce. So we differentiate the limit value for different types of buildings. There's some buildings that we do not include, and also some sizes we do not put the regulation on. For instance, hospitals, sometimes they need more material than the limit allows. Then we have included the construction phase, so what we call A4 and A5, because we see a huge potential for minimizing waste and emissions at that space. But right now we are lacking data to do it even better. And then we also saw that there is a need for us to revise our building regulation to meet these new demands. So we are currently looking into how to revise our building regulation. So those highlighted with blue are the phases in the whole life carbon LCA that we are now calculating in Denmark. So we calculate all those in blue together, and then we have A4 and A5 as a separate calculation to really enforce that you have to have a focus on that as well. So all of this was included. Then there was also a strong wish to include, in this slide it says recycled materials, but that is wrong. It is reused materials, and that they should count for 0 in the calculation. So this is a way, it's not 0 when you have to always have to do some work or some transportation with a reused material, but this was a political wish to motivate the industry and let it grow, because we need to use the resources we have better. We are running out of our resources. So this is another way to look at the limit value and how it will be tightened from July. And there is not an average limit. It's just we have many building typologies. I'll show a slide with it. But in average, if we take them in average, then it's 7.1 CO2 equivalent per year, per square meter per year. It's not normal to do it per year. That is a Danish thing at the moment. So if the numbers confuse you, maybe it's because we divide it by. Normally it's divided by. Normally it's up to 50 years, but here it's divided by year. So you see, the construction industry really has to change their practice with the new limit. And then there was a strong push from the Danish industry or parts of the Danish industry to make it even tighter. They wanted 5.8. So we have a voluntary class that you can follow if you want to be more ambitious, and that we call lavemissionsklassen. Here you see how it will gradually reduce our limit. So this is really a way to push the industry and to ensure innovation across the whole value chain. So as I mentioned before, it's really a push from our industry to make it more ambitious, because they see that this is a direction that our transition is going, and they want to be at the forefront. And when we do regulation on national level, we help more collaboration across the whole value chain. So the ministry made the agreement, but it's us as authority that gives input to it. And that is how it's organized in Denmark. So to support this strategy and the political wish, we made a new strategy that focused on how it's possible to introduce the limit value for construction and reduce the climate impact and limit the price. So we can revise our regulation in such a way that both political wishes are possible. This is what we are trying. Then it's not always that a more climate-friendly construction meets the many other demands that a construction regulation has to meet. In Denmark, we don't have earthquakes, but we have many other things, fire, noise, indoor climate. So it all has to meet. And we have to find that balance. So we are looking into that with many reports these days. And then there's a huge focus on resource efficiency. We need to preserve what we have. And it's not just old heritage buildings, it's all the buildings we have that we want to use as efficiently as possible. Yeah, and we have this time schedule from now until the end of 2028 to really do what is needed for this success and these political wishes to be met. So it's very ambitious, and my colleagues are working really hard to implement all of this. Yes, so I don't think it's time for questions right now. That's the moderator. But thank you very much for listening, and we shared some of our experience now. Of course, something else will be needed for your specific context, and we're always very eager to learn from you. I'm very pleased to hear that you have made JCAT. It sounds very interesting, and we look forward to hear more. Thank you.
Thank you, Hele. So I'm quite surprised that it's only 2 years since you have implemented the first regulation, right? You have implemented the limit value in 2023, and you are now tightening the limit value and also expanding the target, adding the A4. A4 is the transport, and A5, that's construction, right? So you have already, strengthened and expanding the target within these 2 years. I was very surprised that. So next, let's hear from Roger about the Swedish approach.
Hi. Hello. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Roger Eriksson. I'm from the Swedish Ministry of Rural Affairs and Infrastructure. And I will talk a little bit about our experience of introducing a new instrument we call a climate declaration for buildings. A quick background to the reasoning why we introduced this new instrument. Since the 90s, we can see that the construction industry have decreased their CO2 emission quite significantly. It has mainly been focused on the heating part through energy efficiency measures, but also decarbonization of our energy system. We can also see that the CO2 emissions from actual construction and renovation have remained quite stable at the same period. And if we include the CO2 emission from imported building material, you can see that about 50% of the CO2 emission today occur during the construction sector phases. So before we introduced this initiative or this instrument, we did a number of initial steps. There were a number of studies and LCA calculation of different buildings that were made. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but the building authority called Boverket did a mapping of the knowledge and the experience in the construction industry of doing this kind of calculation, and it showed that there was a limited knowledge and experience of doing this kind of full life cycle assessment calculations. The construction sector also includes a large number of small and medium-sized companies that have limited resources and are quite risk sensitive, especially when you introduce new regulation. Finally, there is a lack of data when it comes to climate data, and also there's the digitalization process in the construction sector is quite slow. So that's something that we needed to consider when we introduced this legislation. So in January 2022, we introduced a new law on climate declaration for buildings. It applies to new buildings. It basically requires the developers to calculate and report the climate impact that a building have during the construction phase to the National Building Authority. The climate impact of all construction products within the building envelope, load-bearing structures, and interior walls need to be included. So it's only the climate impact from the construction phase, meaning A1 to A5, according to the standard of how to do a life cycle assessment. You can use both generic data and specific data like EPDs. And our National Building Authority also offers an open, accessible database with climate data, which developers can use when they do this type of climate calculations. So why did we take this kind of, or introduce this limited LCA requirement to just include upfront carbon? One of the main reasons was that the majority of life cycle assessment studies that have been made at that point was mainly done by academia, not so much by the industry. So there was a lack of experience and knowledge of how to do these calculations. There was also very important that all companies need to be able to comply with the new rules, and especially small companies, in order for this type of regulation to be fair. So the starting point was that this kind of instrument would create a learning curve in the sector and increase the knowledge of how to calculate the climate impact, but also what kind of measures you can take to decrease CO2 emissions. We limited to those areas and those activities that have the greatest climate impact. And the aim was to make it easier and facilitate for the developers to do this kind of calculation, learn how to do them, and do them with a rather good quality. And that's why we also include this publicly available database with climate data. While introducing this instrument, we also developed a roadmap for how this instrument could be further developed in the future. So the sector could see that in the future the declaration may include the whole life carbon emissions and also might include limit values. Just short about the monitoring, how that works. The municipality checks, so this declaration is reported to the authorities. If you haven't, it's a requirement to actually be able to use the building that you have built. The authority then oversees the declaration and review the quality. They review about 10% of the declaration annually. And they can also request to get verification of how these calculations have been done. Finally, there's also a possibility for sanctions against the developer if you haven't complied with the rules. So this is our, this is not the right picture, I think, but never mind. This is kind of how many declarations that have been reported so far. This is just until 2024. If we look today, we have around 1,800 declarations reported. So we see a yearly increase of the number of declarations in our register. However, it's lower than expected. One of the main reasons is that the construction rate in Sweden have been going down quite a lot in recent years due to high inflation, high construction costs, high interest rates. But we're starting to see more and more buildings to report this data. So if we look at today at how which buildings are reporting, we see that it's mostly single-house family buildings that have been reported, which is quite natural because they take a shorter time to complete. The past year, 2024, we have seen a big increase of multi-apartment buildings being reporting, which is also quite natural because they take a little bit longer time to complete. If we look at the actual results from the calculations and the declaration, there's quite big difference between the different building types. For example, schools have quite very low results. And generally, when we compare to studies and calculation that we have made on more like theoretical reference buildings, we can see that the results in the declaration is lower than those. So this is something that we are looking at now, why that is, and if there is any, we need to do any changes in the legislation. So our experience so far is that we can see that there have been quite a lot of, like the industry have learned a lot, their knowledge increases about doing this calculation. Generally, we've seen that the regulation have been received positively. We see that the use of this database with climate data have been very important. A lot of people or a lot of developers have used it. And it's been very good to make it easier for the developer to actually comply with the rules. At the same time, we see that there are big potentials to streamline a lot when you do this kind of calculation, and especially if you increase digitalization, that would have a very good, like that would simplify a lot and make it much more, you can do these declarations much more faster and more accurate. Finally, I want to say that we have a national registry for this kind of declaration, and that's quite good to have because it makes it quite easy for the state to follow up, evaluate, and see how the system works and if there's any need for corrections. So finally, about further development of this. As I mentioned before, when we introduced this instrument, we also developed this kind of roadmap for the industry so they could see what might happen in the future. The National Building Authority have suggested how this further development should or can be made. It have suggested first that the climate declaration would be extended to include like the whole life cycle, to include both level or A, B, and C. And also there's a possibility for some renovation projects to be included in the requirement. At the same time, the authority suggests that one could also include limit values, but those limit values will be only focusing on the construction phase, so A1 to A5. I want to point out that the government have not taken any position of this suggestion. As mentioned before, the European Union have now a new regulation coming in on this area and requiring member states to do this kind of LCA calculation for new buildings. So right now, the Building Authority is analyzing how this new EU regulation will affect our system and how it will affect our future development of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I think Swedish approach is quite unique that you first target upfront carbon and then gradually expand the target and also like the limit value, introducing the limit value in future. And so you told us that the reason why you start with upfront carbon, I think there are two reasons. One is the impact. So the most, impactful emission from the whole life is upfront in the construction, the product stage. And also you have also mentioned that, so you need to involve all the stakeholders, including SMEs. So you would like to, introduce this upfront carbon at the beginning to target all type of buildings, which, including the housing, right? Thanks. So now we have heard insightful presentations from all three panelists. And before we open the discussion, I'd like to take 5 minutes to, summarize the common challenges and that countries and cities are facing from our report. So let me introduce our report briefly. Okay, so our report was created over the past 2 years by my team, namely Hanagata Marie, Jisoo Yoon, Colin Lee, Matilda Strand, and Gwyneth Ozkoban. So what I'm to introduce is a survey result conducted last year across 11 countries and 7 cities. Please note that this analysis focuses on countries and cities which are forefront in global scale. So several countries and cities have already implemented whole life carbon policies. What is particularly notable is that they are introducing these policies step by step with a clear roadmap. So implementing policies all at once is challenging and should not be attempted. If one were to wait until everything is perfectly prepared, the process might never begin. So it is crucial to move forward step by step while engaging a dialogue with market and local stakeholders. So what kind of strategies is necessary? So our research have revealed that even within Europe, approaches vary. Broadly speaking, the key strategic decisions include whether to evaluate the whole life cycle carbon or to target the upfront carbon. The other example is to begin with a mandatory reporting or to implement limit values. On a more detailed level, considering to include whether you include all type of building components or the systems, or you target the partial part of the buildings. So for more details, please take a look at our report. There are many factors to consider when introducing the policies. So what were the biggest challenges during the policy development stage? It shows that setting limit values, developing database, and deciding on the scope of assessment were identified as the key challenges. So what about the challenges after the implementation has taken? So the results indicate that workload for calculating whole life carbon, data collection, and a shortage of experts were identified as key challenges. Finally, what we want to emphasize in our report is the role of cities. Our report highlights that several cities have taken the lead in implementing ambitious policies ahead of their national government. Beyond the regulatory measures introduced in Greater London and Vancouver, there are other notable examples. For instance, in the city of Tampere, carbon footprint was included as a criterion alongside investment cost and life cycle cost when selecting designs for municipal projects. Remarkably, despite having the highest cost, the design with the lowest life cycle carbon footprint was chosen. This demonstrates that even municipalities without regulatory authority have various ways to take an action. However, challenges exist. As Lamia pointed out, even in advanced countries and cities, the collaboration between national and local governments is not always sufficient. While we propose a step-by-step approach, what is equally important is having strategies to speed up and scale up. In doing so, public-private partnership and stronger collaboration between national and subnational government will be the key. Thank you so much. So I'm moving back to the moderator. So, before we start the discussion, I would like to take some questions from the floor. So if you have any question to the panelists, so please raise your hand. 日本語で質問していただいて。
And you can ask your questions in Japanese because Hanagata-san, Marie-san there will translate consecutively. She is the lead author, by the way, of this report. And I know that she labored very hard to develop this report, so please. Question to Roger-san. After sampling and doing the survey, and if there's non-compliance, then you said there may be sanctions for the developers. So what sort of sanctions would there be at this current point in time? Perhaps you don't have limit values yet. Therefore, if for example, the target is not calculating appropriately, then you may sanction them. What sort of sanctions?
And Roger mentioned that there will be a sanction if, for the industry if the climate declaration doesn't comply with the regulation. So what kind of sanction would be there, and what kind of criteria do you do the sampling investigation?
Thank you for the question. Yes, there is a sanction. It's basically a fine. And the fine is a fixed number, I think. It's estimated that the fine needs to be higher than what we think it would cost, or what we estimate it would cost to make this kind of calculation, so to make it rational, to make the calculation, so to speak. There's also a sanction which is perhaps a little bit more serious for the developer if you have not reported this declaration. You might not be able to use the building until you've done so. That incentivizes quite a lot to the developer to actually do the declaration.
So based on what criteria do you do the investigation?
Oh, that's a tough question. To be honest, initially, the building authority is quite nice when they, in their supervision, they have a more of a guidance perspective right now. So if you've done wrong, or there's perhaps the quality is not that good, they rather try to guide the developer to do right. But eventually, I assume that's going to be more a supervising, so to speak, compliance focus. What criteria, I'm not so sure at this moment.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can also add, if we include limit values, yeah, then sanctions will have perhaps more a rationale and will be more important.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you so much.
I think this is a very good question. So I want to ask, also to Hele, but before moving to Hele, so Roger, how do you check whether, they are reporting or not? Do you have any system, or I heard that the developers or the house owners need to submit the report to the municipalities, right? Not the municipality, but the BobaCat.
Yeah.
And so BobaCat will check all the.
Yeah, the developer will report to the national authority, building authority. And when you've done that, you will receive like a receipt that, yeah, I have reported. And that you have to show to the municipality in the final meeting. There's often a final meeting before you're allowed to use a building. So that's, yeah, what you need to show for the municipality.
So you mean municipality don't need to check, but BobaCat will receive this application by the email or system online?
Yeah, they have a e-system, electronic system.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's the way you are, leveraging like these digital technologies.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm gonna move on to Hele. So do you have this kind of like checking system, or what if the developers limit values are above the standards? So what happens to them?
Thank you. Thank you. It was a very good question, and something we've discussed a lot amongst the Nordic countries. Actually, there's one other element I will maybe just touch upon, and then I'll answer, because we discussed a lot when to hand in the data. So you can do it in the design phase, and you can do it as built. So Denmark and Sweden have decided to, and Finland, and I'm in doubt about Norway, but I know Iceland do both. At least that is the idea at the moment. But we have chosen, at least in Denmark, to do only to hand in the information as built, because we want to limit the burden we put on the developer. It's very good. You have to consider your climate impact from the, before you make the procurement, and you have to do it all the way through your designing and building process. But we trust in the people. They know the regulation, and they will have to follow that. In the Nordic project, we have done some work on digitalization. We hope to do a bit more, because there are really smart systems of how to help this, we call it, towards an automated life carbon assessment. And that can really help the designers and the constructor in making a more climate, but hopefully also resource-friendly construction. So there's both that, when do you need to report? And that's one thing. I think Iceland have said that they want both in the design phase and as built to, it's kind of a way to help the industry more, like this is a regulation, you need to do this, so that you in as built are not in a situation where you're like, well, you surplus the limit. So back to your question, we'd like to see the climate requirement as another requirement in our building regulation. So we don't want to build something very special for that. And it's normal that the requirements we have we make what do you call it, samples of 10%, and that is the municipality who does that. And we said we started in 2023 with this regulation, but of course it takes some time before you are then as built and can report. So this is the thing, 10% will be tested and see if they live up to the requirements. And if they do so, and we haven't had that case yet, so it's to see what the real fine will be, then it will be reported to the police, and then it's up to the police and maybe the court to define the fee. In Denmark, there's a huge focus on being part of the climate transition. So we don't think it is something that you want to brag about, that you have not lived up to the limit. So there's also a movement amongst the builders. So this is the answer.
Thank you. So maybe I can take one more question. Yeah, so the blue person, yeah. Maybe so, じゃあお二人で最後でお願いします。
So, two more questions.
そちらの青い方です。
Person wearing blue. So we'll take the two questions. And Hanagata-san, please translate. Thank you for the interesting talk. So in Japan, in various places, development is ongoing. And life cycle carbon assessment, if we were to do it for those, how it would be, is what I was thinking. So I want to ask Roger and Hele, in introducing this regulation, were there resistance from the industry? I can imagine that there would be. What kind of resistance was there? I mean, you can say there wasn't, if there wasn't. But so what was the response from the developers? And if there was some negative reaction, how were you able to convince them and lead and realize the law to be formulated? Please explain. So the next person, please ask the question.
So thank you so much for the very interesting discussions. And there is a lot of development works ongoing among Japan. And I was wondering how much it's going to be if we do calculation for those development works. And then I have a question to Roger and Hele, both of you, that both of your countries has already implemented regulations. And if there is any voice of opposition from industry, or maybe not, I would like to hear about that. Thank you.
And also the reasons.
よろしいですか?
If I may. A related question. So the limit value, when setting the limit value by application or by size, I think that there could be large variance. And so in explaining the limit values or to have people understand the limit values, I think that it has to be convincing. And so how do you decide on the appropriateness or suitability to get the consensus of people who use them?
So when setting limit values, since the emission from building differ building by the building, so how do you convince industry about the set limit value, and how do you justify the value that the government sets?
Okay, so the second question is, to Hele, I think. So Sweden has not, introduced a limit value yet. So let's start with Hele about the second question.
Thank you very much for the good question. So of course it depends. So there was one slide that said how we differentiate or limit value for different buildings. So at the moment there's just one limit, 12 kilos CO2 gram per square meter per year. So that's for buildings over 1,000 square meter, that's new build. Whereas from July, it will be differentiated because different building typologies use different amount of CO2 when you build. So first, to set the limit value in 2023, we had 60 cases. It doesn't sound like much, but it was at the time the best that there were. I don't know if I can say the world, but as far as we knew, because we didn't want only pilot cases that were like extraordinary or had extra money. We needed something that was representative. So we built the first limits based on that. The reply from the industry, who had been pushing the government to implement the limit value, because they see it also as an innovation policy. You force the industry to be able to be competitive on the green agenda. So they wanted us to, or they wanted the government to implement it. They thought, so it's hard to say they, because of course there are more numbers, and sometimes it's the big that have a larger voice than the small ones, as Roger mentions. So maybe there are small companies that doesn't have the voice, that thinks differently. Or they have a voice, but they don't have the time to use it that much. They thought it was very unambitious, 12 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year. But the main aim for us as a government were to have a learning phase. There's a lot of capacity that need to be built. Researchers, scientists, craftsmen, consultants, all of that. So it's more been like a learning phase. This is coming. And now you said before that it was quite ambitious after 2 years, but we have ambitious climate policies in Denmark. And it was really the push to find more climate reducing measures that made us differentiate the different building typologies and made it like tightened quite a lot. We had a different introduction from the first strategy, where it was not supposed to be that much strengthened, but it was a political wish to strengthen it this much. We now have more cases, so we have more data to build the limit value on, but it is a challenge to find these data, and it's also something that we're facing now with the European regulation coming into force. And this is why it's been recommended that there's also other ways of finding what is average way of building for different building typologies. You can artificially make these assumptions. Of course, you need to test them, but researchers have recommended that is a way to start. Then the thing is, as you move ahead and as the industry changes practice, often the industry, construction industry, at least in Denmark, are seen as conservative, because when you build something, it's built to last for long. So you need to, stick to your rules. But we see that it's really changing fast. And of course, there's risk in that, but for the climate change and the transition there, it can be positive. So the numbers are also changing very fast. So maybe the limit that seemed ambitious at one point, it's not as ambitious now, because the cases we're getting, they are improving. So yeah, maybe that was a long answer, but I hope I answered.
Thanks. So let's move on to the first question. And this was also my question to you guys. So, I mean, many audience, I guess, may wonder, so what were the key drivers behind your, country's achievement, the success? And so, within the industries, including, so could you evaluate what's happening with the industries? Haley, please. What are the key drivers for these ambitious policies?
So it's very normal in a Danish context. So when the minister who made the strategy, was part of making the strategy and the first political decision, he made like a coordination, a group of stakeholders, key stakeholders from the industry, who would be part of further developing and giving input to the strategy and the implementation. It was part of the strategy to set down this group of key stakeholders from the industry, so that when we make political suggestions, they have the opportunity to give their voice. So the industry are the one building, so they know the context, and we're super dependent on that information. So we have a very close and very good collaboration with them. So really, they are the big voices there, are the ones pushing for it. Yeah, so it's in Denmark, it's across the Nordic countries, in the EU. It's now in April in Tokyo Metropolitan City. So it's, and there's also many other places. So it's really moving forward, and they wanted to be in the forefront of that. And then there was the political decision, I think it was in 2019 or 18, to reduce our climate impact by 70% compared to 1990 conditions to 2030 in Denmark. And to do that, the Prime Minister said, every sector has to tell us what they will do, and they are welcome to tell us as civil servants or as a government, how can we help them achieve their goals. So there was a strong private-public partnership in achieving that.
Wow. So I'm going to ask Roja, so what were the key drivers and what was the reaction from the industry?
It's very similar to in Denmark. The industry have been asking for this. The industry kind of sees that they have to do this climate transition to remain competitive nationally, but also internationally. In order to reach our climate targets, they need to transition and develop new solutions that lower emissions, and it will also create more innovation. One example in Sweden is that the industry itself have created this roadmap of how to become fossil-free by 2045. And the climate declaration and eventually limit values is one part of that roadmap. Secondly, I would say that, as Helle mentioned, a close cooperation or a close dialogue with the sector or the industry is very helpful. The building authority have that when they developed the suggestion, and I think that have had a very positive effect on how they received the regulation. If I want to just make the first question that was asked, if there was any opposing views, I can add that there were worries amongst perhaps smaller companies that how that would affect them. And that's one of the reasons why we introduced this climate database to make it easier for companies to do this calculation. And also we did a lot of information measures before and during the implementation. Generally, I would say a lot of the industry also wanted perhaps a little more ambitious declaration, which included the whole life carbon. But there's also a political consideration that needs to be. You don't want to perhaps increase regulation too much, too fast. Construction costs in Sweden is very, very high. We don't want to increase it too much, or we try to limit the economic and administrative burden of developers.
Thank you, Roger. So sorry for my poor, time management, but I would like to ask one more question, especially Takashi. So I think you have already participated OECD Sustainable Building Roundtable for 3 consecutive years, and you have had this kind of, ambitious policy in European countries. But my question to you is, what was your, reaction, and what are the takeaways with this, discussion?
Okay, thank you. So as you said, luckily I have joined the OECD Roundtable for the 3 consecutive years. And when I first participated in your meeting 3 years ago, as I was in charge of building energy efficiency regulation, I think I made a presentation about the energy efficiency. But many of the European countries, like France and Holland, were talking about carbon, not the energy efficiency. And I thought this is kind of strange. And I realized that the European countries have already moving from the topic of energy efficiency toward the carbon. And at that time, I didn't know the word of embodied carbon, but they started talking about embodied carbon deeply. And when I get back from France, I consulted with Professor Murakami and Professor Ikaga as well. Maybe we should tackle this embodied carbon for the next step. And luckily, they have established this private-public partnership called the Promotion Council, and they enthusiastically discuss this issue. And within, in less than 2 years, they have established, as they said, JCAT calculation tool, free of charge. And now we in the promotion phase, I think. And last year we have established the ministerial meeting among the ministry to talk about how we may be able to introduce the legal system smoothly. So I think 3 years ago when I joined your OECD meeting, I thought Japan is maybe the one lap behind, and we have to catch up so much. But now I think I realized many countries, even Denmark and Sweden, has similar and common problem solution that we are facing right now. So I still think we can learn each other so much. And there are many other countries who have not started this discussion in Africa and Asia. So maybe Japan still has some possibility to contribute to the international society. Thank you.
Thank you, Takashi. I totally agree with that. And so, I mean, many countries and cities has not started discussion of this kind of whole life carbon policies yet. I mean, we Japanese always think that European countries are forefront, but including the European, EU's states, it's only a few countries have already implemented whole life carbon policies, such as France. I mean, of course, Sweden, Denmark, France, Netherlands. It's only a few, right? And so my last question to Hele and Roger is that, I mean, what will be your recommendation to the countries or cities which have not yet introduced whole life carbon policies? So what will be the first step for them? So could you give, some kind of recommendation for them, what to start with? Roger, please.
Good question. I think, well, first of all, I think, as you mentioned, other countries have starting to implement different type of instruments and have done a lot of studies, and I think I think other countries can use. So you don't have to kind of invent the wheel one more time. Instead, see what other countries have done and share information and experiences. Secondly, I think involving the industry is always a good thing. It makes it more acceptable, perhaps, when you introduce new instruments, and it also prepares the sector for what's about to come, so to speak.
Thanks, Roger. Hele, please.
So I echo what Roger says. No, I really agree very much. Yeah, there is the OECD report. It's in Japanese and English at least, and it's even in a tiny version or like short to the bone. And it's really, really good. I never had such a long questionnaire with so many really good questions. So I agree with Roger, like, don't develop the, that's a Danish thing maybe, don't reinvent the wheel. We say don't redevelop the deep plate. That doesn't make sense. So don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from the experiences others countries have had, but of course adapt them to your situation. As I said before, Denmark don't have earthquakes, but a lot of other countries have. So in that way, you will have to adjust your ways to your national context, the climatic context. The minister mentioned some of the climatic challenges. I think we're all facing new climatic challenges, but maybe yours are different again. So you'll have to adapt it to your situation so you can read it, learn from it, and take what you can use. So that is definitely one recommendation. I echo, involve your industry. I think you have a great, I assume, I don't know that well, industry. You already have a great fundament with the private initiative. And then you're lucky that someone is making sure that your ministries are talking well together, coordinating this effort, because I think one thing that is really important to remember, and one thing that we also did in Denmark and the other countries, and I think it was my key takeaway first, build up competences. It can easily, especially maybe in a country like Japan with a lot of people and efforts, become bottlenecks, and you don't want that, because that can be expensive. So start creating this competence, and it's in many, many, many ways. We did the skills for reuse because we think it's really important that carpenters or craftsmen also know how to build for the future or to preserve what we have. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. So, let's continue this kind of discussion. And please do participate this year's OECD policy seminar again. Thank you. So, 最後にじゃあ、素晴らしい
So, to the wonderful panelists, let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much, Miyamori-san, moderator, and the panelists, Hele-san, Roger-san, Imamura Takashi-san. Thank you so much. Please leave the stage.
Now then, we would like to resume the program. Next, we have a panel discussion. Panel 2, Spotlighting on Japan. What are the next steps? So let's welcome the panelists to the stage. The president of Institute for Built Environment and Carbon Neutral for SDGs, or IBEX, President Mr. Ikaga Toshiharu. He's also the Professor Emeritus of Keio University. Next, from EMLIT, the Housing Bureau Deputy Director General, Mr. Shogo Yadomoto. Next, from the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Bureau of Environment Deputy Director General, Koji Miyazawa. And from Sumitomo Forestry Company Limited, President and Executive Officer, Mr. Toshiro Mitsuyoshi. And our moderator is Professor of University of Tokyo, Mr. Tsuyoshi Seike. So I'd like to now pass on the microphone to Professor Seike to moderate the session, please. Hello, my name is Seike from University of Tokyo, and I'm honored to serve as the moderator of this session. So nice to meet all of you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this splendid event. And of course, I don't want to repeat others by repeating their names and organizations. And the Minister of EMLIT and Mr. Izumi talked about how Japan has been actively promoting energy efficiency in order to reduce CO2 reductions. But as Imamura-san said, all of a sudden, the topic had already switched to carbon from energy efficiency. And so for the past few years, we have been working very hard to align ourselves with the global trend. But as the title indicates now, what are the next steps for Japan? What is the way forward? And there's a lot that remains undecided. But we can perhaps learn from the leaders in the world, and of course areas that Japan has already built a strength in, and balance both as we consider the best way forward. And that's being discussed right now by many stakeholders. So I'd like to share with you some of that discussion as a basis for our panel today. So you already know the names of our panelists, and they are all members who have been leading LCA in Japan. Mr. Ikaga will talk about the discussion on how to promote the JCAT. And then, inclusive of that, Mr. Yadomoto will talk about the policy from the government's position. And then as has been mentioned many times and was mentioned by Lamia-san at the outset, it's not only the national government, but another major player would be the municipalities. And so representing the municipality, we'll have Tokyo Metropolitan Government's Miyazawa-san and his very, very innovative approach at the TMG, and also representing the private sector and Mr. Mitsuyoshi from Sumitomo Forestry Company, which is really an innovator in their field. So we would like them to make short presentations. We're very sorry for the short time available, but if you could introduce your activities and then lead on to the discussions to follow. So we would like to start with Professor Ikaga, please.
I would like to present my views as the first speaker. So the whole life carbon assessment of buildings, how are we going to promote this in Japan? Well, I would like to reflect on the past and also cover this topic. Now first, the whole life carbon reduction. Well, we have started to do this in 1990. And by the way, 1990, the CO2 emission, 40% of the CO2 emission back then was coming from the whole life carbon related to the construction ministry. And at this academia and the Japanese construction administration and also Nikkei Ren, we have been looking into this, the Architectural Institute of Japan. And in 1997, the Architectural Institute of Japan made this statement. It was at the time when the climate change framework talks were taking place at COP in Kyoto, and we said that we also had to abide by the numerical target from the construction sector, and this was to declare that the construction ministry will work towards achieving these targets. And once we achieve the short term, we were able to achieve a 59% reduction by 2050. That was the calculation back then. But if you look globally, 2050, they're saying net zero. So we have to make more effort to achieve net zero instead. Now, after this statement was made, when we design a building, we want to look into how much whole life carbon reduction was possible. And it was in 1999 that the guideline was put in place. It took 9 years to put together the guideline, but the calculation tool and the database in Japan, we have this economic statistics that we look into the construction and equipment data. So this is built into the input-output table. And so we put together this guideline, and in line with that, MLET, they looked at the government buildings, and whenever new buildings may built or the renovation is take place, they announced at the same time the calculation tools to be used for that purpose. And then in 2005, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, the Metropolitan Government's buildings, the public buildings, for those constructions, again, they announced the tools, and during the design contract, it was obliged for the operators to use those tools. Now, on the legal basis, in 2007, there was the Environmentally Friendly Contract Act put in place, and the national government, whenever they designed the government buildings, it was necessary within the contract to include whole life carbon. There was this checklist which included WLC. This became mandatory, and as for specific measures, the MLET guidelines were used. So this has been the case. So we have been engaged with WLC from the past, and then 2008, from 2008, CASP. And this would be LEED in the United States, such an evaluation system. In there, they had this simplified whole life carbon assessment introduced. But it was a very simplified version, and based on the past data, statistical data. People did not think they were calculating in using this. But there were 24 local governments from Hokkaido to Kyushu, which in their ordinances said that it was mandatory to do CASP reporting, and there the whole life carbon assessment result need to be disclosed. Well, more than 20,000 whole life carbon data are available, but it's not as if we can use this for the limit value determination. So we have to work harder to collect data. I'd like to speed up a bit. Well, yes, Mr. Imamura earlier talked about the Zero Carbon Building Promotion Council, but in this council, they develop tools and develop database, especially EPD. How in Japan we try to have widespread use of EPD and the latest of what is happening overseas. So through activities at this council in 2024, in October, a JCAT, this tool was introduced. And here, from the time you build till the demolition, every year, the carbon emission can be displayed, or the carbon storage of wood can be shown as reference. This is just reference, but so there are those numbers that can withstand different checks or calculation. Also, 25-ton case study has been conducted. First, upfront carbon, a case study result. There are different building structures, different uses, different structures, and different size, area, floor area, and stories. And looking at this graph, you will see that there's a lot of variance. Depending on the use or the height of the building, there are differences. So the limit value, in order to reach that level, we need to accumulate more data in order to determine such limit value. And this slide talks about the whole life carbon case study, especially the operational carbon will be main use does bring about a lot of difference here on the operational carbon. And if we were to use this for determining limit values, then we have to think about a lot of things. I think this will be necessary. And currently, what kind of design should you do? What sort of construction method should be adopted to reduce WLC? We are putting in place the design guidelines to understand this. And the last slide here, well, we finally have come to recognize this issue. And in September, we are going to hold this international conference in Tokyo, Whole Life Carbon. Is going to be one of the main themes of this conference. To the members in the audience, I would like you to participate in this conference. So this is an invitation to you, and on this note, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
はい、加賀先生どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Professor Ikaga. Next, I'd like to call upon Mr. Yadomoto, Deputy Director General of the Housing Bureau of EMLET, please. Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I am Yadomoto from the Housing Bureau of EMLET. Nice to meet you. And I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to present to you today. From me, I'd like to talk about how the significance of efforts to reduce WLC in buildings from the viewpoint of EMLET and Housing Bureau as we work toward carbon neutrality, what we expect from the building sector. So, in April of this year, all newly constructed buildings will be required mandatory compliance with the energy efficiency standards. And then by 2030, we hope to raise the mandatory energy efficiency standards to the ZEH or ZEB standards, that is net zero energy levels. And through the strengthening of these efficiency standards, by 2050, we want to secure the level of net zero energy on a stock average for energy efficiency for all buildings. And the CO2 emissions by sector in Japan is the chart at the bottom right. 1/3 is from the commercial and housing that is in the daily operations, that is gas and electricity usage or generation, etc. That's 1/3. And therefore, the emissions reduction for the construction industry had been prioritizing operational carbon reduction in the past. But for energy efficiency, as was mentioned earlier, the mandatory standards for energy efficiency and also raising the standards in toward 2050 carbon neutrality, we now have, I think, the goal in sight. However, for decarbonization or the reduction of life cycle carbon, from that perspective, I think that the caused by the newly constructed or renovation of housing and commercial buildings, I think there's a lot of energy that's generated or CO2 generated in the non-building, for example, the manufacturing of the materials and the equipment, etc., and the use in the buildings as well as in scrapping, etc., and they cannot be denied, and that accounts for about 10% of the total. About 40% of the CO2 emissions in total Japan is related to buildings. So even if the residents with the same standards for energy efficiency, if you could, for example, change the materials, the choice of the site or the building, or the procurement, or the use of renewable energies for construction, etc., that could help to reduce the CO2 emission at the manufacturing as well as at the on-site construction level. And the manufacturing of equipment and materials, etc. And that will be a new world where there will be still room to enhance CO2 reduction. And so we should not leave this just to the efforts in the transport and other sectors. I think that it's also necessary to take this problem up in the building area as well. For example, the transport of materials. For materials or equipment that's transported from afar, for example, using ships, etc., to reduce the transportation energy, that's very important. But we should also make efforts to reduce the distance traveled through choosing other procurement sites or other sources as well as materials, and that could help to decarbonization and reduction of CO2 overall. And that sort of approach should also be done during the manufacturing and procurement stages in the building and construction industry as well. And when we do that, by reducing operational carbon, you can reduce energy and CO2, and the stock, of course, will be replaced, which will be a long-range impact, whereas the reduction of embodied carbon the effects will be felt in a more short term, over the short term. So both views are necessary, and that could accelerate the decarbonization of the industry and will become increasingly important going forward. Now, inclusive of residences, buildings are built according to the requirements of the building owner, but it must also design and construct according to social needs. And in Japan, from a long time ago, there has been frequency of large urban fires and need to cope with the earthquakes, as well as universal design and decarbonization. So according to such changes in social needs, I think that there's been an increased number of social needs and requests for the transition of the architectural design. And so they're always in a trade-offs relationship. But regardless of the trade-off, we must, of course, respond to such various needs as we engage in manufacturing and construction. That's required, I believe, in the design as well. To reduce the whole life carbon in buildings, not only in design, but materials and equipment manufacturers, building owners, etc., must be involved. So it requires the catalyzing of change in all stakeholders, and reducing operational carbon alone would not be able to lead to, according to changes in the way you procure or choose procurement sites or procurement sources, etc., the CO2 generated will change. And therefore, we believe that this requires an overall transformation, and we must change the society toward an appropriate direction. That's sort of a comprehensive approach is necessary. As Seiki-san said, by using a unified calculation methodology called JCAT, we hope to be able to increase the sophistication level and the accuracy of the calculations. And for that, we have four major challenges. That is establishing a database for CO2 intensity, also establish a system to promote the implementation of LCA, also human resource development, and balancing the decarbonization efforts with the earthquake, disaster prevention, etc. So all of the ministers involved and stakeholders must get together to join in discussions to overcome these issues. And in December of 2022, the Zero Carbon Building Promotion Council was established, and in 2024, the EPD Promotion Council, as well as the interministerial liaison meetings were established, and through the industry, academia, and the government collaboration, where they're trying to introduce these systems step by step, and we want to develop a roadmap toward the introduction of this system. So I do hope that all of you here today will be interested and can cooperate so that we can all work together to make this a good system based on good design and good operation. So with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yadomoto. Next, we have the Deputy Director General from the Tokyo of the Bureau of Environment, Tokyo Metropolitan Government, Mr. Koji Miyazawa, please. Thank you for the introduction. This is Miyazawa from the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. Pleased to be here. I'd like to talk about the decarbonization initiatives for buildings in Tokyo. First, I'd like to explain the current situation of buildings in Tokyo and the issues. So the total area of buildings constructed in Tokyo each year account for more than 10% of construction starts nationwide, and buildings, well, 70% of CO2 come from buildings, and so we believe that taking countermeasures is very important to counter climate change. And so we have, from 2002, the Tokyo Green Building Program for large buildings, for existing buildings. We have the cap-and-trade system from 2010 to ask for reduction of emissions in operations. And then from April, for the large housing manufacturers, we oblige the PV and the insulation and other equipment. And so in the residential top runner system, in addition to the insulation, we believe that the photovoltaic targets have also been set at the national level, so we want to operate the system in line with the national system. And so today, I'd like to talk about the Tokyo Green Building Program for the large new builds, especially for the upfront carbon amongst the whole life carbon. So first, outline of the Tokyo Green Building Program. So those new buildings with a floor area of 2,000 square meters or more, this would apply. And for the environmental performance, as you see in the chart, based on the standards of the TMJ, 3 levels evaluation is done, and the report is to be submitted. That's mandatory. And the Tokyo Metropolitan Government will make that public. And so we aim for that building to be appreciated in the market if they are environmental friendly. So this would apply to 2% of buildings, but in terms of the floor area, would cover 50%. So in order to enhance the environmental performance of large buildings, this is quite important system. So we started 2002, more than 20 years ago. So it's a Tokyo unique system for those buildings 10,000 square meters or larger. That's where we started. And then we reduced that to 5,000 and now to 2,000 square meters. So the scope has been expanded and the standard has been strengthened so that we encourage higher environmental performance buildings. And for non-residential, we have mandated the various energy conservation standards even before the national government. And so this shows the trend of the energy conservation of buildings. So we have been strengthening the standards, but the 2020 onwards, you see level 3, which is the highest environmental performance. You see a significant increase in the share of the level 3 buildings. So from April, this system will be strengthened further. I explained the outline. So we will strengthen the energy performance standards, and there will be mandatory installation of PV and EV chargers. And in order to appreciate the efforts of building owners, we would introduce the whole life carbon perspective, including a procurement of low carbon materials. So the whole life carbon concept, the first time we discussed this was in 2020 in the Environmental Council of the TMG. So in their report, it said that in addition to the energy conservation, we should work on reducing the embodied carbon. So we set up a council to study this, and we got the feedback from experts. So we created an evaluation system for embodied carbon. And so after the design is completed, this is to be submitted. And so amount of materials to be used is already decided when this is filed. So at the construction phase, well, the upfront carbon part, that's where we have decided to focus on. And we had the instruction from Professor Ikaga. Thank you so much. And the life cycle CO2 calculation issues and overseas situation he advised us on broadly. And next, I explain about the system. So upfront carbon measures. So at the time of construction, we want them to understand the CO2 emissions, and also we want them to use sustainable low carbon materials. And so we evaluate at 3 levels. So energy conservation, operational carbon was the centerpiece of our work prior to this, but materials to be used for construction and the CO2 emission from construction site, we want them to understand so that we can share views toward reduction, and we believe this will be the first step toward that kind of work. And last October, so we developed this together with industry and academia. Well, the JCAT was developed in that effort, and so in operating this, this should be used, or one-click LCA. These kinds of calculation tools should be used. And most of the upfront carbon would be coming from the construction materials themselves. So low carbon construction materials should be chosen, so we want to encourage that. And so that is what we are aiming for here. Finally, in terms of publishing the measures, and so at the government level, the system has been introduced, and in this system as well, we want to visualize the environmental performance of buildings. So for condos, we have this mandated green labeling, and for office buildings, the publishing of environmental performance certificate is mandated, and we will renew our website, and we will show the environmental performance of each building, including the upfront carbon. So by visualizing the owner's efforts, we want to create an environment where these efforts are appreciated. So we have been operating this for 20 years, and so based on that accumulation of the data, that has been a very powerful force in bringing this forward. And after we started to study this in just 2 short years, at the national government level, there has been the study of this issue, and that will be accelerated further. And so in new buildings, not just operational carbon, but upfront carbon, the whole life carbon reduction will be required. And we hope that by taking this kind of step-by-step approach together with the national government, we want to create a decarbonization society through these kinds of construction initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miyazawa. And next, we'd like to hear from Mr. Mitsuyoshi from Sumitomo Forestry, please. Hello, I am Mitsuyoshi from Sumitomo Forestry. I would like to talk about our company's decarbonization initiatives. And first, a brief company introduction. Our company here was founded in 1691 when the Sumitomo family started mining at the Beshi copper mine in what is now Ehime Prefecture. To procure wood needed to fuel copper sintering, there was need to manage the forest. And that is how Sumitomo Forestry began. During the post-war high economic growth period, we began importing lumber and wood structure construction. We began wood structure construction in Japan and overseas. And about 50 years ago, we entered the custom-built home and real estate development business in Japan. Over the past few years, we have been fully engaged in the medium to large-scale wood building construction, both inside and outside of Japan. And currently, we are doing business in mainly the environment and resource, timber and building materials, housing, construction, real estate, and performance by segment is as shown here. And this is our company's value chain, what we call wood cycle. We are leading in the fields of forestry, wood, construction, energy, and circulating through the wood cycle. We contribute to not only decarbonization of our company, but also the whole of society. The right graph shows the wood cycle where we visualize impact of decarbonization on society. This is the Miyazaki, our company's forest, and every 50 years we cut and then plant, and then we use the timber for wood structures, etc. It shows the cycle that we have achieved. And so from this sustainable forestry, we are trying to realize as carbon sequestration over a long period of time. And the construction waste as unused materials from forests are consumed as bioenergy. Compared to when the trees are unattended to, you can see that there is high decarbonization impact. Through our business activities, we circulate the wood cycle to create environmental, social, and economic values. Today, I would like to talk about how we visualize buildings' whole life carbon in line with the theme of standardization of decarbonization in the construction sector. As you know, the global energy-derived CO2 emission of this emission, 37% is attributable to the construction sector. Within the whole LWC, it is important to visualize and reduce embodied carbon. An image of operational carbon and embodied carbon reduction is shown in the graph. By enhancing the building's energy-saving performance and realizing ZEH by use of solar power and others, we can reduce the operational carbon. To reduce embodied carbon, in addition to the use of wood, visualizing emission from construction materials, including steel and concrete, is also important. One-click LCA is a software capable of doing precise calculation of embodied carbon. It is an international standard LCA tool used in more than 70 countries. This application is from a forestry industry in Sweden. And our company from 2022 is the exclusive sales agent of the Japanese version of One-Click LCA. We have already delivered the product to many companies in the construction real estate sectors. I would like to introduce three features of the One-Click LCA. One is a precise calculation of CO2 emission. Through precise calculation, the company's reduction efforts can be properly reflected. One-click LCA has many generic data and EPD data registered from different construction materials. So it can accurately reflect CO2 reduction efforts during construction, since it can calculate fuel use in material transportation and during construction. The second feature is efficient data calculation. And data can be directly taken from BIM, making a calculation more efficient. And for each life cycle, they have automatic calculation function. So calculation is very efficient. Going forward, it's important to link with BIM to enhance productivity of the construction sector. The third is high compatibility with international certification. One-click LCA is compliant with ISO and can be used directly for more than 80 green certifications, such as LEED. Recently, there is increased presence of foreign investors in our domestic real estate market. There's increased foreign ESG money inflow and foreign real estate companies in Japan. Yet, foreign investors are saying they cannot compare Japanese real estate environmental information with other countries because the information is based on Japanese standards. Therefore, in order for our real estate to be properly assessed, it is important to visualize CO2 emission in line with international standards. Now, this is a summary of our challenges going forward. In order to promote embodied carbon reduction, what is important is data connection and widespread use of EPD labels. Regarding BIM connection to address design workload reduction and serious shortage of manpower, BIM adoption needs to be expanded. And major BIM soft, there needs to be a direct link with EBIT. And we believe that one-click LCA, because it can be directly used with Revit and others, it can make efficient use of BIM data and lead to efficient design and LCA calculation. Widespread adoption of APD, reflecting CO2 reduction efforts for individual products, will lead to overall CO2 reduction and positive cycle across the entire supply chain. So we believe that it will create a positive cycle, and therefore EPD acquisition is indispensable. In order to realize the widespread use of EPD, we have one-click LCA's EPD generator to help construction material manufacturers reduce workload and cost in acquiring EPD. As shown in the slide, last year, in 1 year alone, we had about 20 products which acquired new EPD. Meanwhile, our company's housing materials alone use as many as 100,000 components. EPD penetration is an urgent issue, and yet one company alone cannot come up with solutions. Instead, the whole of industry needs to be engaged. To enhance industrial productivity and decarbonization, the whole supply chain, including construction material manufacturers, need to be engaged. And one-click LCA, an international standard compliant CO2 calculator tool, is needed, and we need to further improve this to realize BIM data connection and widespread use. To this end, we want to see collaboration amongst the industry, government, academia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Mitsuyoshi. I believe that Japanese people did not know the scope and breadth of the business conducted by Sumitomo Forestry, because some people think they run forests and some people think it's a construction company, but they use one-click LCA, or they sell one-click LCA as a tool, and they also have a lot of lumber import a large lumber import business. Now, lumber wood is a key material nowadays, and Sumitomo Forestry is, of course, very deeply involved in that, and that's why we selected Sumitomo as one of the speakers or the panelists. So now we'd like to go into the panel discussion. Now, because of the nature of this seminar, we can talk about tools or databases that Mr. Ikagai and I am involved in, and what should we do to promote them, and also what sort of policies would be necessary to overcome the hurdles and challenges. And I think we can speak from different perspectives. So the Tokyo Metropolitan Government and a private industry, Sumitomo Forestry Company, what sort of policy or tool developments they would like to see. So from Mitsuyoshi-san and Miyazawa-san, perhaps you could share with us your requests to the government, and maybe the three, or the academia, and maybe the three of us, we can take turns to respond to their requests and calls. So starting with Miyazawa-san and then Mitsuyoshi-san, in that order perhaps. So what should we do to help the Tokyo Metropolitan Government? Well, as an operator of a system, we don't want to introduce systems which will place an unnecessary burden on private industries, and that has been our policy all along. But if you seek something that's very, very detailed, then that would only increase the burden on the operators. So our system, although it's just taking one step, I think we want to focus on having the people take the first step to utilize the system. And for example, if they could assess the emission, and then they can get level 1, and then design, and in the construction side, if they could start that work, then they can go up to level 2, and perhaps upload carbon if they could assess it, and then they'll be able to get level 3. So they can start with simple things. So rather than going for detail or accuracy, we want to make it as simple as possible, to make it understandable, and also to visualize the CO2 emissions. I think you need some unified standard. But I think that we should focus on voluntary assessment. But going forward, we want to create a assessment tool that would allow for comparison between different operators or different companies. Second point is in calculating the CO2 emissions to provide an incentive, that would motivate them to do more. And of course, we would like to place a lot of emphasis on communication. So how to create a system that can be incentivized, that can incentivize people, I think is very important. Also to use the EPD and also the emissions intensity. And I think EPD would become the priority going forward, but I think people start with default with calculation of intensity, but going forward, we want to make that more detailed and more accurate so that it can lead to greater CO2 emissions. Mitsuyoshi-san, now. Thank you. Well, the emissions from the construction industry accounts for 40% of total emissions, and that fact is not known that well amongst the people. So I think we should start there to share and communicate our message. And at the same time, as I said earlier, Sumitomo Forestry's homes, the number of component parts is close to 10,000 on average. We use a variety of different materials and equipment, and not only the large materials manufacturers, but also many small and medium-sized companies. They also manufacture various equipment and materials related to construction. To invest in obtaining EPD, I think they have a lot of resistance, because if you get EPD, would you be able to sell more products? That's the first reaction you get from these SMEs, these small and medium-sized enterprises. Therefore, as I said, I think it's necessary for the industry, the academia, and government as a whole to involve these companies and give them incentive to engage in decarbonization and provide various support, like the kind of support that's provided by TMG, by the municipalities. I think that would, of course, facilitate things. And of course, it'll be impossible to start by calculating the CO2 emissions for all 10,000 components. So you could start where you can. For example, the beams, the foundation, or maybe up to the gypsum board to calculate up to that point. That's how we began our activities internally. Thank you. So you shouldn't start from a very detailed system or go after accuracy, and you shouldn't stretch things too much. And I think that was a message that came up in panel 1 as well. And as Imamura-san said, to take it step by step and cautiously listening to all voices of all stakeholders as you gradually build it step by step. Also, I think people have been talking about EPD, which is to develop materials with accurate measurements of the environmental burden based on third-party certification. And I believe that Europe already has begun this system, and they've been manufacturing a lot with this EPD. But Ikaga-san's LCA guidelines, that has become proliferated as a very fair way of assessment. So I think that many people thought that was enough for the Japanese market, and so we were rather belated in EPD. But of course, we were leading in a sense with that sort of unique system. So now many of these businesses can make a calculation, but now we need to replace it with a more accurate system, and I think that has led to this challenge. But as Mitsuyoshi-san said, to assess the impact for all 10,000 components, and of course you have products with for just 5 or 10 large manufacturers, but you also have the door and the shutter industry with maybe 500 to 1,000 or so manufacturers. So doing that for everyone would be very difficult. And I'm involved in developing the data, so I do fully understand and appreciate your point. But at the same time, the incentive would be to make an extra bit of effort to make those businesses which developed EPD or did a little extra work can be rewarded for their extra work and incentivized. And I think it's necessary to develop a system over time that could do that. So I'm in charge of databases, but another major point would be looking at the whole life carbon and to develop a tool for whole life carbon. That's Ikaga-san's perspective. And also, in spreading the use of this, what sort of support could be given by the government. So Yadamoto-san on that point. Now, if we could start with Ikaga-san. Well, the EPD for materials and equipment, construction materials and equipment. Well, up to now, the efforts in Germany was a leader, and we had been doing a lot of discussions with them, and they said that using EPD, they could reduce carbon emissions by 30%. So they set the generic data higher than average in order to obtain such a reduction. And now we do have the input-output table, which was well developed here in Japan. So we started by relying on this input-output table, but because it's an input-output table, it doesn't. It does include emissions for all companies, so it starts large, and it's about 30% more probably than what's necessary. And about 300 items based on EPDs are included in the JCAT. But when you look at the details, the input-output table data ended to be smaller, and therefore there was no incentive from using EPD as a result. And therefore, I think there's room for improvement, certainly. Also, how to make it simple to reduce the burden on the users. And earlier, I think I talked about CASB, and the current CASB is based on the guidelines of the Architectural Institute of Japan. It's a simplified version, and within this year, we'll replace that with the JCAT, and we'll announce it next year, as early as next year. And so we will use that simplified version to deliver to as many people as possible a smaller burden version and get them used to it. And once we can accumulate the data, then we should be able to get a sense of the overall level.
And Mr. Mizuyoshi talked about how to simplify things. So we're trying to respond to that request. Thank you. Yadamoto-san, please. Well, disseminating this kind of system, it's very difficult because construction industry has a very wide base, so you need involvement of very many people. So first, work on it. I think that is important. And what we can do is maybe create rules, foundations by the academics, and give some incentive for people to work on it, or to create an environment where they will be compelled to work on it. It's either one of the two, and that should help to disseminate the system. And in addition to that, at the design or construction, we ask people to think about this, and there has to be room for improvement. So in terms of procurement of materials, I mean, the environmental friendly materials, they have to be available. I mean, even if they're available, if they're very expensive, you wouldn't be able to use it even after you go through this exercise. So we have to work on that aspect as well. So we have to really move this quickly. But the LCA evaluation, if that should move forward on its own, but if we don't have the actual materials to back that up, it will be pie in the sky. It will not be realistic. So this will not be the scope of MLIT, but METI. But to give some incentive to the industry's initiatives, that will be the issue that needs to be considered. So if there is an incentive for working on this, maybe on the construction material side, maybe we can provide the incentive. That's one way. And so in that way, if there are initiatives in the construction manufacturing, then maybe at the FSA, there could be some support from the finance side. So it could evolve into that. So construction design is done with a trade-off amongst various factors, and the architect would make a comprehensive judgment. So allow the trade-off to be incorporated into the design, create an environment that's conducive to that. I think that is important. Thank you. Just one point to what the Yadamoto-san said. And well, listening to your talk about transportation rationalization, well, this is an OECD seminar. And so rationalizing transport, or rationalizing without changing the plant, that will make transport easier, and the cost will be lower, and the CO2 will be reduced. But to relocate the factories for that town, that will have a very huge impact. Sumitomo Forestry, if they were to relocate or close a plant, that would be a huge negative blow to that community. So in that sense, the construction-related industry or construction material industry, well, we have communities that have such industries. So methods to reduce upfront carbon for them. The one part of that is to make efforts at the plant, but also the other part is more efficiency of transport. But we have the plants all around Japan, and that is also important for the country, that it is dispersed around the nation. And if we just look at numbers, we might lose sight of the importance of that. And I think that is a concern. So what about that perspective for the construction material manufacturers? That perspective is very important. So ultimately, the location of the construction materials is important in terms of regional revitalization. So that's one perspective. But on the other hand, to concentrate plans to locations where it's easier to use renewable energy. That's another perspective. So from an energy perspective, concentrate them to where there's RE abundance. Maybe for decarbonization, that's better. But if that should lead to regional decline, that may not be acceptable. So it's like a trade-off in design. So it's a big argument you have to make. And this is an issue that cannot be solved just from an LCA perspective. You have to look at the balance amongst various things. Thank you. So I've been working on LCA for many years, and I get drowned in the numbers, and there is that moment, so I want to avoid that. And people in operations, they should work on places where it's easiest to tackle, so that is good. So calculating LCA, so who are you competing with that? It's this imaginary self who would design in an ordinary way, or design with LCA in mind, or is it yourself designing for refurbishment to new buildings, or are you comparing with other people doing so? So with design of construction, you have to compare with everything, and you have to really work on what is most suitable for this society, so that the societal sharing is achieved. And so there has to be sort of shared values in order to move on to the next step. So this is something I want to ask the three other speakers as well. But Miyazawa-san, you talked about wanting to compare. So if you collect the data, you have the urge to compare. And also, what do you calculate for? Is it for comparison or to improve yourself? That was the question raised from Yadamoto-san. So what's the TMG's view? And what's Sumitomo Forestry's view? And what should be our view about the tools from that comprehensive perspective? So Miyazawa-san, Mitsuyoshi-san, and Ikaga-san, in that order, please. Thank you. True. You can't do the comparison and verification just with what we have. And what we're starting is sort of an additive system, so give additional points for efforts. And so in this system that we have 26 items. Well, for residential, for non-residential, it would be 27 items that you would evaluate, and you look at the comprehensive total score and do the comparison. And so that is what we'll be publishing on our website. And so CO2 reduction, measurement and reduction, and adding natural sources, that will be added. So it's just two of the many items. And so it's not sufficient just to do this, but you will get a positive evaluation if you do this. So let's start with this and then create a more detailed system where you can have a horizontal comparison. So first, start by praising people's efforts is what you're saying, I see. So from Mitsuyoshi-san's perspective, what do you say? So construction material manufacturers, many of them are small-size companies. So to have corporate efforts to create a product where CO2 emission is less, then we in the industry, we have to make the efforts to actively utilize them, and there should be incentive for that. I think that's essential. So different perspective. Now, Japan, we only use 40% domestic lumber. We have so much that we have planted after the war, but 60% of lumber imported from outside. And so the trees that have grown, well, we should develop competitive centers to process them so that we can have wooden city offices, schools, or elderly people's homes. And this is a little bit different from LCA, but I think it will be important for companies to work on that, since that will reduce CO2. Those who are doing LCA, you know that with steel and concrete, you're making things at 1400 or 1600 degrees. So like it's like 60,000 to 500. It's like 2 orders of magnitude difference with wood. And so that's much lower energy in terms of manufacture. Wood has many good attributes, but in terms of LCA, it is one of the materials with the lowest environmental load. So we should try to use that, because if you use that, then use of steel and concrete will be reduced, so that will help to reduce CO2. It will be a key material for that.
And other than wood, you have to calculate the others too. But while we increase wood, at the same time we have to have a lot of data to be able to do the calculation. So I think Sumitomo Forestry is engaged in different sectors, and therefore that was a comment. And next, Professor Ikaga. Well, Mr. Yamamoto said that in the securities report, up to scope 3, the information should be disclosed. It will become mandatory at the Financial Service Agency, and I think that many of the housing material manufacturers and others have to comply with this requirement from the government. Now, JCAT can be used for this purpose. I think that we are aware of this, but first, you have to disclose how much emission there was. That's the first point. But meanwhile, the contribution to reduction, scope 4, as it's called recently. So how the contribution to reduction, how you appeal this is internationally and also within Japan. For each industry, I think they're looking into what can be done for this. And in construction sector, this also has to be done, I think. Well, Mr. Mitsuyoshi talked about the large size wood construction, the buildings, office buildings. Well, normally you would need reinforced concrete and SRC, but you're using wood instead to build large buildings. And to assess that, what do you compare it with? I think that... well, in this case, normally you will use reinforced concrete, but as a result, we're using wood instead. You have been able to reduce this much. I think that will be the comparison that will be made. But what you compare it against is not decided yet. We're still in discussion. And I think this will be a next issue for JCAT to address. Well, tools need to evolve. And I think this is one of the issues that JCAT has to address. Thank you. Well, yes, I think that there was a suggestion we have to start where it's easy, and also we need a precision to a certain extent. But do we compare ourselves against the competitor or oneself? How to express the reduction? This expression method is something that we have to reach in a consensus so that everyone can work towards that. And we have to have a system where we can compare the reduction efforts against something. Because if we have that in place, it will be easier to work harder and not compete really, but just strive to achieve that goal. And I think this is something that we need to have a deep dive discussion on. And we ran out of time to take questions from the audience, but following session 1, session 2, we asked about what the next steps are. I think we have been making effort here in Japan about upfront carbon. The CO2 emission during construction also needs to be looked into, and we need to reduce where possible. And I think that we are in the process of doing that. And in doing so, there have been a number of issues that have come up. I think that speakers were able to talk about this, and even with these experts, we do have things that we are troubled with, and things in common and things that are different. And I think that the people here and the people listening, I hope that you'll be able to learn from this and think about what we need to do going forward, because I think everyone here needs to be involved. So let us try to share our wisdom so as to be able to achieve our goal of carbon neutrality. We call on you for your participation towards this effort. So I hope that you agree with me. And to the panelists, I thank you all. And also I thank the audience for their listening. Thank you very much.
モデレーターの清家先生。
Thank you to Seike-sen, our moderator, as well as Dr. Ikaga Yadamoto-san, Miyazawa, and Mitsuyoshi-san, our panelists. Thank you so very much, and if you could send them off with hearty applause, please. Thank you.
それでは
Next, we would like to call upon Chairman of the Board of Mitsui Fudosan Company Limited, Mr. Masanobu Komoda, to talk to the title Ambition to Build a Zero-Carbon Society, the Developer's Vision. Mr. Komoda, please. Hello, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction. I am Komoda of Mitsui Fudosan Company. And I'd like to thank you, first of all, for giving me this opportunity to speak today about the group's challenge toward a zero-carbon society. As the panel indicates, in 1991, which was the year of our 50th anniversary since founding, we established this end mark philosophy that you see on the left. And the philosophy means that the dichotomy between economy and culture, or cities and nature, or development and conservation, or to play versus work, these are all contradicting or conflicting concepts. So our goal is not to choose between these two conflicting concepts as either or, but to coexist with both of them through an and approach and work toward harmony. And the reason we established this philosophy is because back then, urban development was thought to be the destruction of nature. Therefore, urban development, we thought, is to conserve what must be conserved in nature, but still develop cities which are livable for human beings. So urban development that's in harmony with the global environment. That was our thinking when we established this and mark philosophy. And as part of our efforts to date, our group has actively committed itself to climate change action by joining the RE100 and also endorsing the TCFD. And in 2020, we announced the group's GHG emissions reduction targets. And the following year, we revised upward our 2030 reduction target. And as a specific strategy to achieve the target, we have formulated the group action plan for the realization of a decarbonized society. The group's target is to reduce GHG emissions by 40% from fiscal year 2019 levels by 2030 and to achieve net zero by 2050. And this is in line with the UN's 1.5-degree target as well as the Japanese government's target. Now, on this graph, if we continue with business as usual, GHG emissions will increase as shown in the light blue line. However, by improving the environmental performance of buildings and utilizing renewable energy, we are planning to reduce the emissions as shown in the dark blue line. And in order to further achieve these reduction targets, we have formulated the group action plan toward the realization of a decarbonized society and various initiatives. So I would like to introduce our 05 Action Plan 05 initiatives to reduce CO2 emissions during construction. And this graph shows the total GHG emissions of our group as well as a breakdown by scope. And the total amount of emissions in 2019 was 4.38 million tons. And next is the breakdown by scope. Scopes 1 and 2 emissions, that is Mitsui Fudosan's own emissions, is the gray portion in the pie chart, and that's only 12%, 12% of the total, which means that the remaining 88% is Scope 3, or emissions from our supply chain. And more specifically, it's operational emissions. For example, the building tenants, as well as people who purchased our homes and they use the building or homes after they purchase it, and the CO2 emission they emit. And the pink shows the emissions at the time of construction of the buildings or the residences that we construct. And as you can see, of the total amount of CO2 emissions, about half of the total is emissions during building construction. Now, to reduce emissions, the first step is to calculate and to assess or grasp the amount of emissions. That would be the necessary first step. However, the conventional calculation formula for emissions was to multiply the construction cost by a certain coefficient or a certain number. And the biggest problem with this approach is that it tends to result in higher GHG emissions than the actual GHG emissions because the construction cost of an energy-efficient building is generally higher than that of a normal building. And so you lose the incentive to build energy-efficient buildings. So rather than using this multiply by a certain coefficient approach, it's necessary to identify which parts of the building is emitting higher emissions. So we need to understand or grasp the amount of emissions by the construction type and materials. So we have adopted a new method to calculate the amount of emissions based on the quantity of materials and other factors. But the challenge is that we alone could not resolve this issue. Therefore, we had to involve many different stakeholders in utilizing this new formula. So first, we and Nikken Sekkei prepared and published a draft manual that would serve as the basis for the material quantity method calculation. That is a formula or calculation formula to develop the material, the amount of emissions based on the quantity of material by material. And the public announcement of the manual revealed that other companies in the same industry were also facing the same issue. Therefore, in November 2022, we established within the Real Estate Association of Japan a study group with experts, member companies, construction companies, and others. And in June of 2023, the association released the manual for calculating GHG emissions during construction, and the document was released to the public. At the same time as the formation of the Real Estate Association's study group, the Zero Carbon Building Promotion Council, which is a project subsidized by the MLET, was launched. And since then, the council and the Real Estate Association have been working together on this issue. And I will not cover it in detail today, or rather, I think it was probably detailed in the previous session. But the Zero Carbon Building Promotion Council developed at the end of October last year a tool to help calculate GHG emissions over the entire life cycle of a building called JCAT, and they released it as well. And the Real Estate Association's manual was positioned in the construction phase section of this JCAT. Also, for all properties to start construction after October 2023, general contractors will be required to assess at the completion of the basic design and start of construction and completion of construction, assessing the GHG emissions using this manual. And this is the result of calculations based on the manual for calculating GHG emissions during construction. In the previous method, the breakdown of emissions was unclear, but by using the quantity of materials approach in the estimated breakdown, it is now possible to visualize the emissions for each material as shown on the pie chart. And as you can see, the steel and concrete materials is encircled in blue, and the left is the multi-dwelling complexes. And for multi-complex dwellings, 67%, and for normal office buildings, 63% of the emissions come from steel and concrete during the construction phase. And this breakdown of emissions allows for a detailed understanding of reduction potential, so we can encourage companies in the supply chain to make reduction efforts based on such numerical values. Now, finally, I would like to explain the direction of our future efforts. And first point is our efforts to reduce emissions during the construction phase, which I explained today. By using the Real Estate Association of Japan manual that I introduced, we can now see the breakdown of emissions during the construction phase. However, the manual is only a visualization of the breakdown currently. As I mentioned earlier, steel and concrete accounts for a high percentage of buildings' emissions. Therefore, inclusive of those areas with high emissions, we will continue to encourage the reduction of intensity, and we will encourage the supply chain to reduce emissions in intensity based on such breakdowns, including steel and concrete. The second point, which I did not explain today due to time constraints, is our efforts to reduce operational emissions. And as I said earlier, our building tenants, as well as the building or residence buyers and the emissions during the operational phase. So for new properties, we will be achieving the ZEB level environmental performance. And for existing properties, through systematic renewal, we hope to improve the energy-saving performance of properties and generate as well as use renewable energies on the property so as to improve the environmental performance. We view GHG emissions as one of the most important factors in urban development, and we will continue to promote sustainable urban development throughout our supply chain going forward. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Komoda. We would now like to have the closing remarks from the Deputy Director General of the City and Housing Bureaus of EMLIT, Mr. Itsuhiro Miura. Thank you for the introduction. I am Miura from EMLIT. In closing the Japan OECD High-Level Policy Seminar, I'd like to say a few words. Let me say thanks in English.
Close of today's seminar, I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to all of you for your participation. I'd like to express my deep appreciation to Lamia-san for presenting an excellent report, as well as to Helle-san from Denmark and Roger-san from Sweden, who have been leading advanced initiatives in this field. あとは日本語でやります。また
And also from the Japanese academia and industry, we had the top leaders, and we were able to have very active discussions. So my deepest gratitude to that as well. Myself, December last year, I participated in a meeting held at the OECD headquarters, and I presented Japan's initiatives and had discussions with others in charge of policy. And I felt the importance of working on the building CO2 reduction from a life cycle carbon perspective. And the report that was announced, that was based on the detailed analysis of 18 countries, and it will be very instructive for Japan and other countries who will be working on full life carbon. There were many issues that are common to countries. So how to share the data between public-private sectors, how to utilize digital data, how to develop human resources. These are some of the important issues. So for these global issues, hope that this will be a starting point for further collaboration between public, private, and academia. And MLIT will be making efforts toward that goal. Once again, I would like to thank all of the speakers, and I want to wish for the further development of OECD and success of all of you present here. And with that, I'd like to close my remarks. Thank you so much. Mr. Miura, thank you very much. With that, we would like to conclude the Japan OECD High-Level Policy Seminar, Zero Carbon Buildings, Global Trends on Life Cycle CO2 Reduction. We thank you very much for your attendance.